Coming at number 5 now, we have James McDivitt. James Alton Jim McDivitt was born on June 10th, 1929 and lived his life under the glorious title of NASA Astronaut. Now he was commander under the Gemini 4 flight, where fellow pilot Ed White performed the first ever US spacewalk, which paved the way towards the moon landings and modern space exploration as we know it. Now later in life he became manager of lunar landing operations and was the program manager for the Apollo spacecraft mission, so he's got quite a few feathers in his cap. However, it was even weirder then when James McDivitt claimed that he saw something very weird while up there in space. During the 1965 Gemini 4 mission, plainly put, James McDivitt spotted a UFO. So convinced of the fact, McDivitt even spoke about the event in an official interview with NASA. He said, "I looked outside, glanced up, and there was something out there. It had a geometrical shape similar to a beer can or a pop can. It was all white." The press took hold of this story and went wild, and reports of the UFO went global. It wasn't until years later though that McDivitt retracted on his statement and put the whole thing to bed. Or maybe that's just what the government told him to do.
Next up at number 4 we have Yang Liwei. Yang Liwei, born 21st of June 1965, is a Major General, military pilot and astronaut of CNSA, China's equivalent of NASA. In 2003 he was the first person sent into space by the Chinese space program, gaining national notoriety as a grade A certified badass. It was weirder still then that during his maiden flight into space he recalled hearing a repeated knock on the body of the space vessel. He described it as sounding like someone knocking on an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. Imagine that, you're alone in a tiny spacecraft in the endless abyss of space, and then you hear someone knocking trying to get in. Also, there's the fact that space is a vacuum and it's a given that there's no medium for sound to travel within. It got even weirder though, because in later separate missions in 2005 and 2008 respectively, subsequent astronauts reported similar sounds with the same consistent knocking. Well, who knows what it was, but whatever wanted to get in thankfully didn't yet. What do you think of that?
I don't know why I think of that. Literally.
If you were up in space and you heard someone knocking at your door.
I mean, I'd probably just open the door and get it over with right there. If I'm going to die anyway, I might as well do it on my own terms, you know.
You're pretty claustrophobic though.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in space in the first place.
Oh, okay, yeah.
No, I'd avoid that whole situation altogether. Exactly, I'm doing it right now. Alright then, jumping in now at the number 3 spot, we've got Neil Armstrong. You may have heard of him, the world's most famous astronaut. Neil Alden Armstrong was born on August 5th, 1930 and sadly passed away at the ripe old age of 82 in August of 2012. Now during his time, Neil Armstrong was heralded as the first superstar man and was at the forefront of the world's fascination with space travel. After all, he was the first man to walk on the moon, or in a film studio if you're bored and angry. But several theorists believe that something entirely different went down whilst Neil took his stroll on the moon. According to retired Chief of NASA Communications Maurice Chatelain, only moments before Armstrong stepped down the ladder to set his first step on the moon, 2 UFOs apparently hovered overhead. During this time, there was 2 minutes of radio silence that NASA attributed to a television camera overheating, which apparently disrupted the reception. Okay, sure. Well, what did Neil Armstrong say in those 2 silent minutes? "These babies were huge, sir. I'm telling you there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Mr. Armstrong kept his lips tightly sealed until he passed away, but there are some people that still firmly believe that in 1969 not only did we land on the moon, but we may have also discovered alien life there as well. I think this leaves conspiracy theorists with a little bit of a dilemma. How could NASA cover up the alien meetings if it was all filmed on Earth? Something has got to go, and it might be reality.
And bringing it in at number 2, we have Vladimir Kovalyonok. Phew, this one is a bit of a doozy. On May 5th, 1981, Soviet hero and cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kovalyonok made a claim that still perplexes people to this very day. According to Vladimir, he had just finished doing some outer space maneuvering outside the Salyut orbital space station when he looked out of a porthole and saw something that would make his hair stand on end. Unlike in America though, Vladimir was encouraged to openly express exactly what he saw when he returned home, where he described it in a Moscow press conference. He began by saying that many cosmonauts had seen phenomena far beyond the experiences of the people of Earth. At the time of this mission, he was over an area of South Africa, moving towards an area of the Indian Ocean. As he turned, he saw through a porthole an object which he could not explain. And then something happened that blew his mind. Seemingly impossible according to the laws of physics, The object became elliptical, appearing to rotate in flight direction. Before it could move forward though, an explosion happened of bright, beautiful golden light, followed by a second further explosion. After the blast, Vladimir saw a weird white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere, before the scene disappeared from his view. Now, if you believe this guy, then what he describes kind of sounds like faster than light travel, and some alien species just decided they'd pop in and say hello and show off their technology. Who knows? But if you believe this Russian cosmonaut, then who's to say that they're not still out there?
Well, I mean, I don't think the Russians have ever lied about anything, ever. I can't think of one instance where...
I didn't expect you to say that.
No, I definitely believe the cosmonauts, maybe more than the astronauts. I do think there's a culture in the US of
I mean,
hush hush.
he doesn't really have reason to lie though, really. No one's saying it's not a trick of the light or, you know, something bouncing off somewhere, but he's up there. He's smart enough to get up there. Stupid people don't go to space.
No.
So
I don't think that. Would they kill him for that? Would they kill him for saying that? As long as it's not hurting.
he's a hero.
Yeah, exactly. That's fine. All right, finally now at number 1, we've got Gordon Cooper. Gordon Cooper, aka the first American to have a nap in space during his 34-hour Mercury 9 mission, which was launched in 1963. He was born in Oklahoma in 1927. Gordon Cooper was a pretty level-headed, softly spoken guy and racked up some pretty incredible, valuable missions into space, as well as other critical research that came with it. He was possibly the most vocal advocate of the life forms that lurk in the depths of space, so much so that he even went to the United Nations conference to submit his extraterrestrial claims. Now, during his 22-hour orbit trip around Earth, as he floated above Perth, Australia, Cooper suddenly noticed a strange green glowing object approaching the Mercury capsule that he was flying in. Sounds weird, doesn't it? Well, Gordon Cooper definitely thought so too, and he was convinced that he was witnessing some sort of alien life in action. Well, the object that he saw was actually picked up by a radar tracking station in Moochia, Australia, and Cooper reported the incident via radio while he was on the mission. When he landed, things got a little bit hush-hush, you could say, and Gordon Cooper's incident was swept under the rug. When questioned, NBC reporters were explicitly told that he was unavailable to comment regarding the strange green sighting. What do you guys think of that?
What do I think? Gordon Cooper sounds pretty legit though. To go to the UN and say, guys, I saw an alien up there.
Yeah.
Take some brass tacks.
I was going to say that not everyone can do that. You know, I don't want anyone watching this to think, oh, I saw a UFO as well. I'll just go to the UN and tell them about it.
How do you submit that?
No, yeah, they don't care. Unless you've been to space, they don't care. Don't try.
Does that mean if you have been to space, you can say whatever you want?
You can say whatever you want. You can talk to the UN all day. Do you think we've got anyone who's actually been to space watching this?
Starting off this countdown, we have Apollo 1. On January 27th, 1964, a fire took the lives of 3 astronauts during a launch rehearsal test. A damaged wire was the cause of this fire. Then a spark in the spacecraft ignited a flame. The high-pressure pure oxygen environment was the perfect catalyst for a fire to start. Then the foam pads and nylon netting in the craft added fuel to the fire. 4 astronauts struggled to get out and ended up perishing in the flames. Their last communication went as so. Ed White yelled, "Fire!" into his headset. Then Gus Grissom yelled, "I've got a fire in the cockpit." Then the 3rd astronaut, Roger Chaffee, yelled, "Fire!" as well. The last thing they all said was, "Get us out." This transmission was then followed by their screams as they were engulfed in the flames. The last thing they said was a plea for help for somebody to get them out of there before they died. Oh, that is so dark. It just sends shivers down my spine. In our 4th spot, we have the Lost Cosmonaut. Back in the 1950s, 2 brothers, Achille and Giovanni Giudica, were working as amateur radio operators. They gathered together old gear and set up shop in an old bunker. In 1960, they came across something pretty terrifying. So they claimed that they got signals from a Soviet cosmonaut that was lost in space. Apparently, she was returning to Earth's orbit when everything began to go wrong. Her spacecraft was malfunctioning, and in the recording, the woman, speaking in Russian, is pleading for help, saying it's getting hot. Then the spacecraft bursts into flames. Thankfully, they saved the recording so that they could share it with others. Now, the Soviets denied this, saying that it was an unmanned craft that burned. But the thing is, a lot of cosmonauts died during the space race. But the Soviet Union refused to reveal those deaths. Half the time, they would just cover them up. So it could be that this recording is real and captures the last moments of this woman pleading for her life. Moving on to number 3, we have the Soyuz 11. On June 6, 1971, 3 Soviet cosmonauts launched into space. Their goal was to make a record for the longest time spent in space. Sadly, the mission failed and they became the first people to die in space. Now, the spacecraft landed perfectly, but when the team opened the hatch, they found all 3 crew members dead. Their faces filled with dark blue spots and blood dripping from their ears and noses. What happened was their breathing ventilation valve ruptured. They died from decompression. They died within seconds. It happened so fast that they couldn't even get a word out. So I'm kind of cheating by putting this one on the list, but the last thing heard from them was a gasp for air, then a weird popping sound, probably from the air in their lungs expanding from the drop in air pressure and being exposed to the vacuum of space. To me, that is more terrifying than hearing them plead for mercy. Like, you're literally hearing them die. In our second spot, we have Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet test pilot, aerospace engineer, and cosmonaut. In 1967, he was sent on the Soyuz 1. The mission ended very badly though. Here's the thing. The spacecraft was very faulty. There was 203 structural problems with it. The thing is, Vladimir kind of didn't have a choice. He was forced to go on this mission. If he didn't go, then the backup pilot, who was his best friend, would have to go. And he said he didn't want to do that to his friend, so he went and sacrificed his life instead. Wow, that's just true friend goals right there. What a hero. Anyways, once he began to orbit Earth, a number of issues began to happen, like the antennas didn't open properly. It was his re-entry into Earth that killed him though. On April 24th, 1967, Vladimir crashed full speed into Earth after a parachute failure. Only a chipped heel bone survived the crash. His body was found as a badly charred lump. On his way down, translators heard him say, "Heat is rising in the capsule." He then began to curse the people who put him inside of this botched spaceship. He was yelling, saying that they killed him. His final moments were him crying and cursing in rage. As a result of this incident, Vladimir became the first human to die on a space mission. Imagine hearing those final moments though. That would just change your life forever. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Challenger. On January 28th, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart during the flight. It happened only 73 seconds into the flight. This resulted in the death of all 7 crew members on board. The crew consisted of 5 NASA astronauts and 2 payload specialists. Basically, what happened was at 11:39 a.m., the shuttle started to break down over the Atlantic Ocean. It started because of a failure of the O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. From there, the right solid rocket booster failed during takeoff. Then the force of the takeoff basically caused the rocket to break apart. Now, it's thought that some crew survived the initial breakup, but the impact onto the ocean surface would have killed them. The last words came from pilot Michael J. Smith. All they heard was him say, "uh-oh," before they lost communication with them altogether. It's believed that the uh-oh came after they felt a huge jolt from the shuttle breaking apart. That's the last thing he ever said. It was later retrieved from the flight deck tape recorder from the ocean floor 2 months after this incident. Now, here's where it gets even darker and twisted. Apparently, a secret tape was leaked from NASA. On this tape, it was revealed that the recording continued on after the uh-oh. After that, you could hear someone yelling, "What happened? What happened? Oh God, no." And then you could hear screams and cries. Someone began to pray, others began to curse. One of the astronauts can be heard saying, "Can't breathe," choking. Another can be heard yelling, "We are dead." Now, apparently this is a hoax and the tape has been debunked, but some NASA employees have admitted to hearing way more after the uh-oh, and NASA is just covering it up.
Number 5 on this list is that green orb. Major Gordon Cooper was one of the earliest American astronauts there was. He was the last astronaut to ever fly in space completely by himself, a feat that's honestly just terrifying if you ask me. While he was out there in space, Cooper saw something that he couldn't explain and something that just doesn't make any sense. It was a rapidly approaching green orb, something that was actually picked up by the radar system that was tracking him in Australia. He couldn't fully make out what it was, but he knew that it was a big object and that it was glowing green. Cooper has since come out and discussed his strong belief in UFOs and aliens. It turns out that UFO sightings are not as uncommon as we may think for astronauts or the government, that these sightings happen very frequently and are very often covered up. For many years I have lived with a secret, and a secrecy imposed on all specialists in astronautics. I can now reveal that every day in the USA, our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this, but nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means. Now that's a direct quotation from Major Gordon Cooper discussing the truth behind his sighting and many other sightings that the government makes on the daily. If this is factual and the government actually does see these anomalies all the time, then it's totally reasonable to believe Cooper saw a real-life UFO while he was in space that time. It should also be noted that when he landed, he was told that reporters were not allowed to ask him about his sighting and to keep it under wraps. Seems to me like these astronauts and the government know some stuff that they don't want getting out. Number 4 on this list is space snakes. Franklin Story Musgrave is a former NASA astronaut who spent over 53 days in space. He's extremely intelligent, having 6 separate degrees, and definitely knows about space since he went on 6 separate missions there. That's why when he came out and spoke about seeing a massive space-like eel up there, it really shocked the world. On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It's rubbery because it has internal waves in it and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and some just single-cell organisms and other civilizations that have been around for 1,000,000 years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things. 6, 7, 8 feet long. You heard that right, guys. I know that he goes on to talk about proteins coming together and stuff, but that seems like a lot more than just a few amino acids to me. That's a big creature that he saw not only one time, but on 2 very separate and different occasions. This is a full-on NASA astronaut who is super well educated, coming out and talking about a massive eel in space. Now, he's the only one who's come out and spoken about such things. However, there was a picture released from the Mars rover with potential evidence of a snake. Take a look at that image right there. That looks a lot like a snake to me, and if there's one chilling on Mars, then there's no reason to think that there couldn't be one in space either. If this is true, then more astronauts definitely must know about this, and they must be trying to keep it under wraps for a reason. Maybe they don't want the public to freak out about these space snakes, maybe they're just scared of them themselves and aren't ready to release the info yet. But whatever the case may be, it's starting to look like our slithering pals aren't just here on Earth. Number 2 on this list is space pee. Okay, so I know how that sounds. No, I'm not talking about some evil urine alien that somebody spotted or some massive pea planet. But this entry is just more about how hard it is to actually live up there in space and the realities of the situation. Also, I guess this is less of a secret, but more of something that just doesn't get talked about enough considering how much it must suck. But listen to this statistic, guys. If you want to go into space and live up there for 1 year, which I frankly don't really understand why you would want to do, but anyways, let's assume that you do want to do that. If you want to go live there for 1 year, then you're gonna need to drink 730 liters of your own urine and sweat. 730 liters. That is 730 milk bags worth of your own excrement that you now need to consume. Now, I obviously have to point out that this is recycled urine and recycled sweat, so you don't need to just pee in a cup and then take a sip or anything like that. But this just goes to show how difficult it is to come by water in space. It's so difficult to get water that we literally need to constantly reuse what we have in our bodies already. Like, you basically never get any new water in your system for an entire year if you go to space. You're just reusing the old water over and over and over again. Honestly, after hearing this stat, guys, I have no idea how these billionaires think that we're getting to Mars. Like, sure, build a ship that can take us there, manufacture a shelter that could withstand the elements, but how about water, dudes? You know, that thing that we need? I don't want to move to Mars and just live off of pee for the rest of my life. Anyways, big respect to the astronauts out there who have to do this for a whole year. You guys are way stronger than me. Finally, number 1 on this list is changing DNA. This one is definitely a weird one and honestly pretty scary. Ranker writes, astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year at the International Space Station in 2016, returned to find that he was 2 inches taller than his departing height. The new physical differences between Kelly and his identical brother Mike, also an astronaut, were startling. Scientists compared the DNA of the two and found that, besides growing 2 inches, Kelly's gut bacteria were completely different and his gene expression had changed. Scientists concluded that the changes were caused by the stresses of space travel, which can cause changes in a cell's biological pathways. Although Kelly eventually returned to his original height, his other genetic changes are seemingly irreversible, meaning Kelly and his brother are no longer identical twins. So that's honestly pretty insane. If we go to space, our DNA can just literally change on us. Obviously, we have no idea how this works, but think about the potential that this could have. Is it possible to harness this ability? To be able to send someone into space and cure a disease that they were born with? Like, this truly feels like some Fantastic Four level stuff right here, where we can actually change our human makeup. Granted, we need to look at it from the other angle as well. Could this be extremely detrimental? Yeah, I think it definitely could. You could go into space and then have your DNA totally change on you in a way that's for the worse, causing you lifelong problems after that. I had no idea that this was something that could happen in space, but it's definitely something that we need to do some more research on because, like, it could be wild.